everyone, today I'm going to share with you an amazing interview I had with the CEO of BioSeaHealth, Hugh Butler. Fueled by seaweed and driven by the UN Sustainability Development Goals, BioSeaHealth aims to improve human and community well-being while encouraging the general public to make a transition towards seaweed-based products. Hugh has a very open-minded and entrepreneurial spirit. With his PhD in agriculture and his background as a technology startup investor, Hugh manages to inspire his team and everyone around him into building a sustainable, healthy, and environmentally friendly economy. I'll let you check that out for yourself.
We started looking at growing seaweed 4 years ago because we could see that seaweed for cows, production of methane, was really, really important. And my partner is actually in the Philippines. So while I'm in Australia, we looked at the growing one and we knew that people grew seaweed in the Philippines. So we started to grow seaweed in the Philippines. And so we've been growing it for the last 4 years. And over that time, we've progressed from looking at how we grow seaweed at scale to the next one was basically biostimulant. And about 18 months ago, we looked at it and actually went into nutraceuticals. So our product range is biostimulants. And now what we're really focused on is actually in the nutraceutical market.
Okay, and so just for the question, you said you're working in the Philippines. Are you working as well with local Australian seaweed as well, or?
My partner is an Australian, and he's been there. He runs a outsourcing business there. So he's local. He's been there for 15 years, and so we work with all our employees are locals. They're generally with master's degrees or science degrees, and they work. We initially started growing seaweed ourselves, so in terms of looking at actually the whole production cycle. But what we currently do now is actually we control that supply chain. So we have contract growers. We pay them about 2 to 3 times the amount that they would get for the dry seaweed. But in return, they have to adopt our HACCP and our monitoring systems and our growing systems that we've learned over the time, and we take sort of best practice. So it's really, instead of to bring them essentially from sometimes subsistence farming systems to the 21st century systems, because people need to know where their food comes from.
Absolutely, and we see it as well here in Europe. All questions about sustainability, traceability are becoming very, very important. So I think you're on the right track for that.
That's right. So we, about 2 years ago, we looked at some technology which actually came out of the mining system, which actually tracked everything. And with the advent these days, the Philippines has got a good mobile network. With the mobile phone, you can actually take the stuff and in real time see what's being grown. In terms of getting organic certification, so we're pretty much, I think, the only organic certified biostimulant in the country. And we're just going through the organic certification, the formal certification over the whole process for the food products as well. I mean, it is grown. We do monitor the water. We do have a whole range of processes to make sure that whether you or I put food in our mouth, we want to know where it comes from, and we want to know that it's particularly, I think the concern is particularly on heavy metals, but it's also the biologicals. And so we're only growing it in areas where we know what the water quality is like, and we can manage that, and we have systems in place so when something untoward may happen, we actually stop production to avoid any contamination at all.
I agree 100% with what you're saying. All these elements are really crucial, and will guarantee actually a smooth transition towards very organic, very high quality seaweed that can be used in much higher tier market segments. And so this brings me to the next question, of course. So beyond the products you have today, so in biostimulants and nutraceuticals, do you have anything else in development that you're going to work in other sectors?
Well, the nutraceuticals, when we started the business 4 years ago, what we saw in the literature is this whole raft of research for 20 or 30 years of products that actually are in seaweed. And what you could see was companies were trying to go and grab certain particular elements. So whether it was Helaminia and some of the elements in there, or whether it was in the products in, let's say, fucoidan extracts. So what our view was 4 years ago was that we should actually focus on taking the seaweed and doing the extracts in terms of the biorefining that we all talk about, right? But what happened to us about 18 months ago was we looked at research that was being done in animal studies and in some human studies, which was about the whole seaweed. And it's one of those things that's really, really intriguing, is that from a company perspective, we need to go down the extraction route to get the IP to protect our IP. From a nutritional perspective, and essentially from a drug-like perspective, the whole plant is actually more effective than the compounds that we can get out of it. So when we've done a clinical trial, we have effects on humans that are essentially no different to a drug. So if we take our seaweed, right, the Capophycus that we're growing, and essentially drying it, right, and having it for food consumption and eating it in daily quantities. So let's say 2 to 5 grams of seaweed a day, dry seaweed, and when you put that up into with moisture, with water, you'd get a bowl of seaweed. Okay, so you don't, yeah, okay, I don't know what a sort of bowl is like, but imagine a soup bowl's worth, okay, a salad bowl's worth. A serve of vegetables. When you eat a serve of seaweed a day, you have effects. For example, if you had hypertension, let's say you had elevated blood pressure of maybe 135 millimeters mercury, so taking seaweed every day, that would go down to 125. Now that's equivalent to a hypertension drug that's on the market today. Wow. That was the really interesting thing that we discovered in our journey, which is why we're looking going forward, is actually we may be able to identify these things in the technology these days, actually identify those compounds, but we don't think it's actually one compound. We're pretty sure that it's the change in, when you eat the seaweed, you have the change in microbiota. That changes all your gut bacteria. It's pretty clear in certain animal studies and in very limited human studies. But then there's the other things that we are really intrigued about and we've discovered, and I can't actually mention them because they're actually in the sort of patent process right now. But there are compounds in there that actually have other effects.
Okay, wow, I didn't know that. There's still a lot to learn about seaweed, I think, and of course we're focusing on these big molecules that we already know, fucoidin, agar, carrageenan, but I'm pretty sure there's still a lot of molecules that we have to discover, and a lot of polysaccharides that can actually have a very nice benefit for the human health.
Oh, I think so. Like there's a paper published on the 21st of March, just a few days ago, which was a Chinese study in that came out, and they looked at about 24,000 subjects. And the nice part about it was that they were looking at things like gout and one of the things when you have basic uric acid. And when they looked at the population that was eating seaweed, then they had much lower levels of uric acid and the associated gout and other kidney type things that they had. We have an example, a really interesting example, that we started the nutraceuticals, and we had looked at the work that Professor Jane Tees had done and some of the work that had been done in Australia, and there's some work that particularly at the International Seaweed Symposium, some of the Chinese researchers and the Koreans. And so we looked at lifestyle diseases, which was hypertension and elevated glucose levels. But we gave it to one of the young women that was actually as part of that sort of community up in the Philippines, came to us 18 months ago, and said, actually my dysmenorrhea, painful periods, has actually stopped. I used to have to spend 2 days in bed with a box of analgesics, and now I don't even, I know that I'm having it because I've got menstrual bleeding. Now I know we're 2 men, okay, and periods and menstruation in many societies are taboo, and particularly so in Philippines, right, which is a strongly Catholic country, and it's unlike some of the other countries around the world that are actually a bit more open about this sort of stuff. So when we saw Katie 18 months ago, we said, is that seaweed? You know, what's going on? So we actually, COVID struck, and we couldn't get product out of the Philippines. And we looked at the product we actually had, and we said, what best use to do? So we did a trial of 150 women for over a period of 3 months. We did a very detailed assessment of what they did. And what we found was that 70% of women that had very severe pain, so in other words, a pain of where you would take analgesics, a pain of 5 out of 10. 75% had pain greater than 5 out of 10 when they started, and within 2 months, 75 had a pain of 5 or less.
Wow.
Okay,
that's impressive.
Now, so that data has taken us down over the last 12 months in quite a different stage. So we've done marketing trials in UK, in Australia, and it's absolutely consistent. The marketing trial with over 2,000 customers today are actually, I mean, the stories would be astounding. So it's a really interesting stuff, and that's why I'm looking at this whole seaweed versus extracts. So it's not explained by the nutrients, and it's not explained by the microbiome changes. But there are other things going on. There's some really intriguing work on that's in the literature. So that's the direction we're heading to. That's what we're sort of passionate about now, and part of the passion is that we need to find a female co-founder, because two old white males, right, are not the right people to be in this industry. Yes, we can grow the seaweed. I came from an agricultural industry and a biochemist and a PhD in biochemistry and those sort of things. But that's not where this is now. This is about the 900 million women a year. About the 40% of women actually have moderate to severe dysmenorrhea. This is for them.
I did not know that. I did not know that. So yeah, as you said, I think there's a market for it, and there is a huge potential. I think having a woman on board will actually make it a bit more, a bit easier as well to communicate. And which brings me to my next question: what would be your needs to completely scale up the business and, you know, attract new, go into new markets and everything else?
So number one, we're looking for a female co-founder to join the team, right? Secondly is that we're already underway. So we're already making sales and we already have a process in place. And part of it is about scalability. So we're limited right now in terms of how fast we can scale with product that we can actually, that I'm happy to take today. I'm happy to eat, right? So there are very limited areas in the current seaweed production where you can guarantee the water quality. There's a lot of concern about microplastics. There's a lot of concern about contaminants. So some of that is just simply putting in the processes and working with someone. And we're working with another seaweed, another climate foundation, which is working on upwelling and on getting water from deeper depths. And so we've got fertility, we've got growth rates, and we've got a supply chain, because there's no sense in going out to the market with a new product and you can't control the supply chain. So that's number two. And number three is actually we're really interested in a team of people that can help us to actually understand why it turns seaweed from just good food to actually medicine. It's as effective as a medicine, and it's not just a nutrition. It's not just nutrition. It's not just because they have 15% of RDA of iodine or potassium or vitamin B3. So we're looking, and we're working actually with the University of North Wales that Everest with, and they're doing some sampling for us, because one of the really intriguing things we looked at what nutrients are actually in seaweed, vitamins, minerals. No one ever, very poor measurement of those things there, because no one's looked at it, at how growth rates and time of harvest, all those things affect the nutritional and the medicinal value of seaweed. So we're looking for someone in that area.
Okay.
And like always, it's all about scaling and about marketing, because it's not that it doesn't work. It's how do we get it to the women that don't talk about it. And in many cultures, actually, it's going to be very difficult to take it to the women, because they're already in, I won't say oppressive societies, but they're not in societies where these things are freely talked about.
Absolutely. And depending on the markets, it's going to be completely different, because in, you know, Western countries, it's going to be very different, as you said, from Asian countries that have much more silence around that kind of subject. And
That's right.
sorry, go ahead.
Well, we are selling it in UK, right? And we are selling it in Australia, and we're about to start delivering it in the US. And we would love to partner with a company that's in the market, and we can be actually in, for example, in Europe. So the women of Europe should have access to this, right? The women whether you're in a sweatshop in Cairo or in a boardroom in New York, it's time for what this does for those people.
Absolutely. And so this brings me to my last question, which is about this passion. So what made you focus on all these subjects and come into the seaweed industry?
Well, I've been involved in climate change, and I had a solar business 20 years ago. In fact, I grew, when I was an ag scientist nearly 45 years ago, we actually grew sugar beet in terms of producing ethanol, in terms of like decarbonizing the stuff. So I've always been passionate about decarbonisation of our society, when we have the technology and we can do it basically at a cheaper price than not. So we got into the seaweed business because of carbon, cows burping methane. Because we figured, but when we looked at it, we said we're too early. We were 4 years too early. Okay? We didn't have the good work on cows, and we didn't have the ability to actually rapidly scale the growing of the Asparagopsis and the other species. And I'm really delighted that people like CH4 and Sea Forest and others are actually got in that thing, because I'm really passionate about that. But we got into this because of basically a mistake, of a random chance. The only reason that no one in science has actually looked at female rats and see whether they had anything on their reproductive stuff was because female rats aren't good rat subjects. They only did the research. If you look through all the research on rats and animal studies, they're almost always on male rats. They never did it on females. Okay,
Wow,
and we just happened to have a boarder at my partner's house who took this stuff. And when Katie told us in Christmas a year ago, I asked my daughter, who's mid-40s, and I said, we've seen this really interesting thing. And she said, because she's eating seaweed for nutrition, like, you know, she's my daughter, right? But with 2 children. And she said, that's really fun, because you don't talk about these things with your children, even parents talking to their daughter. And she said, actually, my pain's gone from an 8 to a 3 as well. And I said, oh, do we pivot our business on the basis of 2 women, right? Two anecdotes, or what's going to convince us that the stuff? And that's our journey.
Wow. And I think it's personal. So, you know, there's all that motivation behind it. And what I really like is that it's multi-sector. You're not only focusing on one part, you're really taking the seaweed as a whole and trying to exploit all its benefits to really share it with the world. I love the message. I love the message. Well, anyways, thank you very much, Hugh, for giving a bit of your time and shedding a bit of light on the seaweed business that you have. And I'm sure it's only the beginning. There's a lot to discover, and I hope that the next milestones will be glorious in the upcoming years.
Thank you very much. And yes, as I said, I think we can be passionate about seaweed because it really is triple bottom line. It gives us the climate change, it gives us the sustainability, and it gives us the human health. And all those things are really worthwhile.
Absolutely. I hope everyone's going to start thinking like that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hugh.